it can be fine. We can talk about how Boris Johnson is absolutely fucked.
Fucking wankmeister Prime Minister, yeah. Boris Johnson, the fucking worst politician to ever win a massive, massive majority.
God, I hope he gets. Do you think there's maybe someone? Do you think there's maybe one person inside him who's like, Prime Minister, I'm sorry, but this is it. We must resign. You don't. If you look at like his there's only like 40 backbenchers or something. There must be, because of all of the government people who literally are paid to keep him in office. So he just has no authority now.
No, absolutely none. And he spent so much time putting out fires that people are going to wake up and be like, "Oh, actually, I am quite quantifiably worse off than I was last year.
Yeah.
Like quite quantifiably, and not even a little bit, but like a lot."
And look, here they come again. Look, Cabinet Minister Zahawi tells Sky News that Boris Johnson has one handsome. They just they're like, this is like the Trump fucking, honestly, alternative facts. He has not won comfortably. Like, what can you possibly? How could you try and spin this?
I know, it's baffling, isn't it?
They are shameless. They are without shame, all of them.
All right, you ready to go?
Yep.
And bounce, Joe.
What?
Huh?
What?
We ready? You look awake, engaged,
Yes.
excited.
I mean, we've said we're ready about 27 times, so yes.
No, I don't think we have.
We've said it a lot.
28th time then. Hello and welcome to Podmart, an imaginary supermarket chain store. Welcome to our store. We've got a special on poorly thought out intro bits today, 20% off. We've got clearance on some fantastic references to things that were on TV 15 years ago for nobody. With a handsome display in our deli of quaint British euphemisms. My name's David.
Well done, Dave. I was surprisingly good from you.
Totally on the fly. I was like, I vaguely thought about it. I was like, I can't think of anything funny. I'll just go with it. Maybe
I'm just gonna start talking and see what happens, and it worked out.
The most surprising thing when it was actually funny. Yeah.
Yeah, that is surprising, Joe.
I'm constantly surprised if I say something funny, but obviously not constantly. Occasionally.
Okay, occasionally, seldom. My name's Sam, and my name's Sam, and I don't usually wear eyeliner. Sharpie occasionally.
And I'm Joe, and I know the difference between a stool softener and a laxative.
That was a long night, Joe.
That, Joe, because I don't.
Hey,
well, one makes whatever's inside mushy. The other doesn't leave anything inside. I think is the overall.
Pretty much it.
Yeah.
They both not have the same effect. I don't know.
One has a more violent effect than the other.
As we learned on that one fateful night, Joe, which we will not talk about anymore. Well, welcome to this podcast No, I'm doing it, Dave, because you're too slow. Welcome to this podcast where we talk about the first episode of a TV show and then ramble about the rest of the series. And today we're doing.
You're proud of that?
I'm proud of it. I feel good. We're doing Superstore.
Superstore, a 2015
what we were even doing. That's impressive.
Sitcom.
Yes.
And I'm going to start off in time on a tradition. I'm going to delay Sam's reading of the plot summary because I mean the name really gives it away. Really.
Mm-hmm.
Have we seen this before? I know I've seen it. Obviously.
I think I recommended
on those facts.
I think I recommended this to you and watched one episode and then never watched it anymore. I was like, hey, this is funny. And then was like, but not enough for me to care.
I've not seen this before. I've heard of it. Again, you definitely recommended this, Sam. It's kind of like The Office in a supermarket, basically.
It's a workplace sitcom, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
The Office in a supermarket.
There are a lot of parallels between this and the Office, the US Office, we should say. It's a lot more upbeat than the UK Office, despite the fact it's set in a supermarket, which is like hell itself.
Yeah. And that's one of the things we can talk about it. So, yes, IMDb's description fairly sparse today. Here's a look at the lives of employees at a big box store, and it's one of those shows where you mentioned The Office, Joe, and it's because workplace comedies are like pretty bankable TV shows, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
We've
They're
obviously
also really easy to write.
Easy to write, pretty cheap to make. You rely on the experience of working in retail and use that as a starting point. We've had obviously The Office as like the one that kicked. Maybe it didn't kick it off, but certainly the one I think popularized it, and then the US Office even more so. With Parks and Rec is another one that comes to mind in terms of that same like vein. This isn't, though, interestingly, a mockumentary. Like The Office is, like Parks and Rec is, even like Modern Family. They've got these. The camera is like a live person, and then they oddly try and bring the camera people in, and it doesn't work at all. It's just dreadful. And why are you doing that, Office? It's awful. But this isn't that. So this is a bit more traditional on the end of how it's shot, but it is very much following the same like it's. Look, it's the shouting, it's the new guy, and it's the grumpy person, and it's like there's Kenneth, except he's the manager. Like all of these,
it takes like everyday occurrences in like work situations and takes them to the extreme. It makes them, hilarious. Basically,
that's workplace sitcoms, by and large, really. I'm interested to talk about this episode specifically because of obviously I've watched all of this, so I have hot takes. Lukewarm takes, cold takes. This series is finished, so this is 7 years old.
That's the deli counter you're back on again, isn't it?
I do want to. I know that I am. You are right, Sam. I'm on the deli counter. We're going to talk about the fact that we aren't American for just 1 second, just in case anyone was confused about that.
We're not.
We're not. So, like, a big box store is, in my experience, I mean, it's different now with like Costco being everywhere. But when we were kids, the only like big box store, I suppose, would be like Macro in Leeds, which is like a big box store. Like you can go and buy stuff in bulk and electrics, and it's more like a cash and carry type situation. Whereas we don't tend to get, we certainly didn't tend to get like, we don't have the Walmart equivalent, or we do now, but we didn't have 20 years ago.
You didn't even really see like the big, like now you get Tesco Extras or whatever, like the Asda equivalent and stuff, which are big supermarkets effectively. You didn't even really get those 20 years ago.
We went down market and the fishmongers.
You just got like you just got a regular Tesco's.
Just a regular sized Tesco.
Just a regular Tesco's.
We bought mussels and liver, and we ate them all up. It was delicious, and it cost us halfpenny, and we used the rest to buy a house. It's a quaint time. I've worked in Curry's, which is like what's the American equivalent?
Retailer?
Yeah, it's an equivalent.
It's an electrical store. It's an appliance store.
Yeah, like, and so that's
washing machines, TVs.
That is the biggest thing about that. And I worked there over. I have worked in other retail as well, but that all in smaller shops. But the Curry's was the one where it was very much like. Look, it's the funny guy, and hey, funny guy, yeah, you're funny. Tell us a joke, funny guy. He's the one who killed himself at the end of season 2.
Narrator, funny guy wasn't that funny.
No, he ended up being a Nazi. and so like, there's lots of the cast of characters of my life was quite funny. But what I think this show kind of gets at is the mundanity of working in retail, especially when you're like one of 1,000. You're not. We used to spend a lot of time just like walking around because you're like trying to sell washing machines to old ladies and stuff, and you think, this is a washing machine. This is another washing machine.
She says it perfect, didn't she? The one who's like Ramona / Amy, like she sort of says that like yesterday was today will be the same as yesterday, like which was the same as the day before. Like it's all just the same.
That's the biggest thing for me about like, because I worked in retail for years. In fact, in what I suppose you would term a department store in America, with like clothing and food and like houseware type things. Marks and Spencers. Just to name drop my previous corporate overlord, and that is the overriding memory. And I know, obviously, Joe, you work for a different evil corporate overlord.
Well, I've already mentioned Tesco's.
Exactly, but anyway, so now we've named and shamed all of these evil corporations that'll, work you till you're dead. But the biggest thing about the reason I no longer work in retail, pay you nothing for it. Although, sidebar, minimum wage when I started working in a shop was about £5.10.
Yeah,
yeah, it was ridiculous.
I was like, wow, great.
If you were under 18, I think it was like £4.90 or £4.70 or something like that.
I'm pretty sure when I started at Tesco's, it was something like £4.85 or something like that an hour. Yeah.
Welcome
to Old People Cast.
That's a sidebar. But the biggest reason I don't work in retail anymore, and I'm sure this is for you the same for you, Joe, is
many reasons.
Many reasons, but the overriding thing, like any job that you want, the desperate to get out of, is when you blink and a year has gone past and you're like, nothing stands out to me in the last 12 months. Like, nothing has been different, nothing has changed. I haven't done anything new, and all the people are the same as well. And I don't mean to malign people who work in supermarkets. Very hardworking, industrious individuals, I'm sure.
But go on.
But there's a thing about retail where it's a somewhat comfortable job. It's not massively challenging. The hours are pretty bad, but you get, in this country at least, statutory holidays and all of that. So it's really easy to just work in a supermarket and then that's fine. That's just your job, and you get enough money to live on, and you just work there for 40 years.
20 years later, you just stood there.
And this show
kind
of captures that. Maybe not this episode as such.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a theme. The Amy character we see in this episode. So the two main characters are Jonah, who's the new hire, and Amy, who's one of the supervisors, I think.
Amy, played by America Ferrera of Ugly.
That's right, yeah.
Betty Femme, and Ben Feldman, who I don't know anything about, plays Jonah. Just before we move on, though, because I think there is something we've lost about working in retail is kind of seen like a dead end job, and that's because it is that's how it's treated by employers and
how it's treated by customers. You're working in retail. When I was at Tesco's and things, you were treated like something people stood in, because they think you are there because you're stupid. Even though 90% of the people who were there, it was like myself, I was a student, so it was a job to see me through university, give me some money to go out and drink.
There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong if employers actually valued and paid people what they're worth and not just scrounging them out of every single penny that's possible, then actually working in retail would be really good. And it would be you could build a career here, you could progress, you become a manager, blah, 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 whatever you want, and you could retire on a nice pension. Obviously, that world does exist.
Yeah, that was the other, there was a lot of people who had done the kind of career and, they were approaching retirement and they needed some money just to kind of see them through. They didn't want a stressful job anymore.
Of the crushing reality of capitalism.
They could afford to...
Carrying people out of burning buildings will not pay for you to live in retirement.
Yeah, so, they were coming up to retirement and needed something to kind of see them through that wasn't stressful and things, so they took a job, or it was kind of stay-at-home parents, that sort of a thing. Not people who, were too stupid to find something else, but there's definitely that kind of... That's how people were treated.
And this episode of Superstore the pilot, so I've watched maybe one or maybe two or three episodes of this, really, but I haven't gone into it in any detail. And I think if we had come onto this, and sometimes we've done this in the past with our pilot episodes of, we've watched one episode of this and we're just going to completely trash it, and even actually after 3 episodes it might end up being really good, but we never know that. Luckily you have watched more of this, Dave, but for me the first episode was wow, we're just sponsored by Walmart. Look at this lovely place to work full of friendly people all having fun. It's no, these people are crushed.
Quite diverse as well. Quite a diverse staff.
They in reality they are crushed and oppressed by a horrible system that doesn't let them take fucking piss breaks. This is the actual. So I did feel when I was watching this pilot of wow, this is sanitized. This is the nice clean face of American retail.
And it is. This pilot definitely is, and it's interesting to we talk about the development of TV quite a lot. And it's interesting. I think that this episode kind of nails some of the characters. A lot of the characters are kind of like, very similar to the characters they will become. We can get to that more, and we'll talk about the plot a bit more. Not massively, I think. It's not massively interesting, the plot of this first episode. But like, what changes perhaps is, like you said, the perception of this store. We keep saying Walmart, but this was actually filmed in a Kmart.
Kmart, yeah.
Which I'm given to understand is like the cheap version of Walmart.
Is it?
Or something?
So is it like the version of Aldi? Is that what we're saying? That kind of thing?
I don't know, Joe. I don't think we have like an equivalent store, because like I think it's like
how did it work? I wonder, in terms of like, how did they just take over a Walmart, a Kmart?
Yeah, the pilot episode was filmed in a Kmart that they basically like at night, and they basically like would set up like they would block things off. And so this first episode isn't a set when they're in the supermarket. It's an actual like Kmart that they must have just paid to lease it, like, but overnight on weekends or wherever. And then when the series, like this obviously been the pilot episode, the series was picked up, they then filmed it on sets. I mean, it doesn't change massively, but there is like a sense of space in this episode that you maybe don't get in later episodes, because it's not a set.
Mm-hmm.
This is a big like warehouse full of electronic goods.
Yeah. And does it, because I think what we were talking about previously was like how actually this episode, this TV series does start to become a little bit more critical of like the horrible corporate. I'm reading here that based in Chicago, does not offer paid maternity leave, health insurance, or paid overtime. Employees may take one bathroom break per shift and are allotted 15 minutes for lunch. Like, so does it become a little bit more polemical? There's a word I went to university for.
So they do explore some things. There's a big like running theme about unions. Like one of the character Jonah's the main character, sort of. Him and Amy kind of comprise the main characters, and he's like a college dropout, kind of like upper middle class, left wing. He's the audience analog in a certain respect of like. And so he tries to get the rest of the staff to form a union. And that's like a big running plot. And it's interesting because of all the backlash, and the company tries to fire them all. And then the company tries to just close the store because they're talking about unionizing. And it's maybe not, but it's not necessarily like existing to take those shots, but it certainly doesn't shy away from taking them later on. There's another plot line about one of the characters is pregnant. She's on maternity leave. She gets paid for about 4 days, and then she has to be back at work. That same character, I think later on in the series, they go to like a rival store. It's like an invented one, like Target or something, but it's not Target. And she's working there as well. And they're like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "Oh, well, I've got a young child, so I can't really afford to live on like one job." And like, again, it's played for laughs, but it does sort of creep in.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus fucking Christ! What a hellscape!
And there's stuff about like the corporate aspect of they'll come in and do like diversity training and things, and it's a bit poking fun at how silly that is. Loss prevention. There's a few episodes about that that are quite funny, and sort of generally there were a few shots taken. Like it could be maybe worse, but certainly it doesn't stick on what the theme of this first episode is, which is kind of like this personal drama, this personal sort of like comedic drama set inside of a big box store. It kind of goes away from that to being like, actually, let's maybe make this a bit sillier and like maybe poke some fun at the existence of this. And you talked about the wages and the bathroom breaks and the horrible conditions and the complete lack of paid leave of any variety. There's a great plot line about ICE as well, immigration raid the store, and it's like, oh well, America's an absolute hellscape.
Yeah, that's the overriding theme, isn't it, as you watch this? But I do think this is quite funny. Like, it's very middle of the road. It's very, we're not like, you can tell it's a network show as opposed to something that was plopped onto Netflix and then abandoned. But so, it's kind of going for something that's everyone can enjoy this type of thing, but then there is a little bit of an edge, and I think what you're saying is that as the show progresses, we get a bit more of that edge, and I do think that's a little bit of a mistake in this first episode, because I think it does come across as being quite kind of like just driving right through the middle and not really edging out. Whereas think about the first episode of the US Office, and it's like we are really, really going for it on all fronts. We are showing exactly what is happening here, and we're going to really demonstrate how awful the Michael Scott is, and all of the horrible shit that's going to happen. And so you kind of like expectation setting.
It's maybe I would classify it as like a program like The Office or even Parks and Rec. Or Modern Family, like they kind of like took a theme certainly, but then really owned it and sort of like took it forward and maybe like forwarded the genre, like strove forward with that sort of idea. Refining the art in a certain respect, whereas this show maybe is guilty of just sort of like existing in the wake of the shows it owes its genre to. And not that's a bad thing. I certainly think it picks up and then tails off rapidly. But like there are some really excellent bits of this season. Like as a sidebar, because COVID is looming, there's a season of this that got delayed, so that delayed filming it because of COVID. And then when the season came out, like it's about working in retail during the pandemic, and actually there's
probably quite a few TV. But there's probably some good storylines in that though. Like
there are some interesting stuff they do, and they're talking a lot about like people refusing to wear masks and like staying safe, and actually why aren't we frontline workers when we have to go to work or they won't pay us, like, and we can't work from home. And there's a certain like there was some commentary there, but at the same time I'm like, I'm living through this, I don't need to also be seeing on the television. Like I'm not the sort of person who enjoys like, do you know what I mean? I don't really want to see a really depressing, harrowing look at
TV's like an escape. It's an escape from that sort of a thing, isn't it?
There's another example.
I watched all of Star Trek to get away from COVID. So
I want Cold War drama. I want like James Bond blowing up the Kremlin. I don't want
people being nuked. That's what I want. I want the imminent.
I mean, maybe that's a little bit too close.
I'm literally seeing that every day.
Yeah. There's another example, which is This Is Us, which is just one of the most depressing shows.
One of the most depressing shows I've ever seen.
Nicola watches it, and
my sister's was watching it, and I was like,
"Fuck!
How do you watch this?"
It is just so dark, so bleak, so harrowing. And then they introduced COVID halfway through. The last 2 years of like, well, I have to wear a mask all the time, and I haven't seen my family's dying, and I can't. It's like, wow, why would anyone want to watch this? And I completely agree with you. And actually, what's encouraging is that, other than a couple of examples, most TV shows and movies especially, because they don't want to date themselves, unless we're doing like a historical film, in 10 or 20 years. I don't want to see masks. I just don't want to see. I don't want to have to be fucking thinking about washing my hands. Like it's harrowing enough. And I think maybe the escapism is where we're at. Now that also brings us to the other point of like workplace comedies. The paper company kind of works because it's a bit ridiculous. Like an entire company that just sells paper, and later on in The Office, Ryan's like, we're going to sell printers, we're going to sell like we become an office supply company, and when they're not doing any of that, they are flipping through what chair am I going to buy in magazines? Like they just sell different types of paper, which was funny in 2005, and now just feels like that's too much. That's over the top. And yet, this isn't kind of going for it. It's a little bit more grounded because you've got like the realities of the American retail trauma that we've mentioned already. So I do think that there's something about maybe your concept for your show just being a little bit more zany than you would otherwise think actually helps to like sell it. Whereas the first episode of this, and this is just talking about functioning as a pilot, and this was, this would have been like a proper pilot as opposed to a Netflix one, as we've said, is that you do end up going, you kind of think you know what you're going to expect from this, and you think that it's going to be like, they do have this the shooter at the end, which is kind of like funny and a little bit more edgy, but you think, oh look, he's mislabeled the prices, and now everything, kind of I would expect that to happen.
Could be, ultimately, this episode could be like, and I don't think the rest of the series suffers as much from this, but like the hot fact that it's in a supermarket is kind of really background. It could be a nightclub, it could be a bar, it could be an office selling paper, and like ultimately, most of the plot could remain the same. You know, if they were all lifeguards at a swimming pool, ultimately, like, do you know what I mean? The actual story that's happening within this episode is not going to be much different.
It's a framing device. The store's almost like it's just a framing device.
But it fixes that, in my opinion, later on, where it kind of leans into it. I don't remember there being loads in this episode, but there's a really good thing they do in the series in general, and it's a shame Ross is not on because he's seen it as well. Is they have these like cutaway, like not gags exactly, but they are sort of gags. They'll have like cutaway gags to like customers doing things. Like none of the main characters will be on screen, but the customers will be like, there's one where, a child is taking a poo in a, sat on a show toilet, like, and there's another one where someone's opening all these bottles of like shampoo and just squirting them on the floor, but like quietly and sort of like put themselves. And there's loads of stuff like that where it cuts away to like the customers who aren't, characters doing things, and you're like, and those are the moments of like reality where you're like, if you've worked in retail or with in customer service generally, like that psychotic nature of people generally is just so like, it feels so real. And that's like a moment of like, obviously somebody making this has worked in retail. I mean, they're all actors, so of course they've all worked in retail and in bars and all customer service, but like, and that really comes through in like there's a lot of humor to be had there. I'm trying to think of another like supermarket based like sitcom.
Supermarket based sitcom,
or like retail based sitcom.
Trolleyed on the British one on Sky. That's about as far as my brain can go.
50s comedy.
No, I think it was like maybe mid 2000s, but yeah, the
1950s comedy. Open all hours. That's a retail. There you go.
Previous episode. Yeah.
Previous episode. Yeah.
I think it maybe just goes back to that thing I mentioned earlier, like that there is comedy to be found there, but maybe that's just like a little bit harder to find. Let's talk about the cast a little bit. America Ferrera, I think, is very, very good. I think without her, you probably don't get this show off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And
she's the star, really.
She's the star, like, and Ugly Betty, which I don't know if you've ever seen Ugly Betty, but that is a very, very
bits of.
It's a very, very fun
masculinity before on other episodes, and obviously that aired when we were teenagers, and I was like, well, obviously that's not for men.
A show with a woman? Good Lord! Like
you have a woman show, my lord.
So anyway, you couldn't watch that for fear of being viciously beaten by your peers.
Exactly, but actually,
what do you mean you watch a girl show?
Lads, it's a really, really fun show. It's like tack sharp writing. It's a workplace show as well because it's set in a bit more niche, a fashion magazine. But what they do and what I think this episode needs, and maybe the whole season, you can be the judge, is we need to ratchet up the zaniness. We need to make it more zany. We need to make it more... And I think it is trying to do that, and maybe it's just a problem with the pilot that it's just a little bit too safe.
It's leaning too much on the... I mean, you see the writing on the wall, on the romance between America Ferrera and the man whose name is Ben.
And just... Yes.
And that's fine, and I think it actually is like a charming plot throughout this, because I think they've got good chemistry generally. Mm-hmm. But like this first episode's leaning way too much on that, especially towards the end of it. I was like, this is really full on for the first episode of this TV
you in the face
program.
with it 30 seconds in, basically. Yeah. Like, and then there's also, I think, what's the other woman in this who like has a crush on him and like thinks he likes her, but obviously he's into Amy. There's the other female character, isn't there?
Laura Fox? No. What's her name? That's the character name is Fox.
I don't know.
The
I don't know.
security, the assistant manager.
Yeah, is it Lauren Ash? Is that her?
Yeah, the
Yeah,
one
Lauren Ash.
who's a bit like gung ho. Yeah.
Tina Fox.
She's
yeah.
Dwight. She's Dwight from The Office. Like the real
Yes,
character
yes.
archetypes
There we
in
go.
this.
There we go. Yeah, assistant to yeah.
And
Assistant to
she
the
obviously,
regional manager.
she obviously has a thing for Ben, who obviously has a thing for Amy. And
So how does that resolve then? How does that resolve? Do they just like America Ferrera and the other guy? Do they start? Are they romantic or what's the? Spoil me. Spoilers.
Eventually, spoilers for Superstore. Eventually, yeah, they do get together. But like as it turns out, at the end of the episode, because they're on about, oh, you can't allowed to wear jewelry in store. She's married and has a child. And like, so it's funny actually because I kind of then the series plays it this way that Jonah's a bit younger than she is. Actually, having looked at it, like the actors are there's about 4 years between the guy who's playing Jonah and Ferreira. He's older, but like I think just genes and the way that they're playing this. Anyway, so they eventually get together, which is fine. The Ash, her character, is more like they kind of go into her being like, oh, Jonah, like she thinks Jonah's in love with her. She's not necessarily interested in him. She just thinks that like
he likes her.
Yeah, and it takes a while to kind of resolve that, but it's more of like she's too obtuse to realize that he's not into her, but she's just obviously decided that he is, and he's too awkward to make it clear. And they get laughs out of that. I think her character, Ash's character, is really good because they kind of like start her off as this very Dwight from The Office. She shoots a shotgun into the air. She's threatening people. She's tackling, shoplifters and all of that. And like they kind of go from that and make her into a character. Which is interesting, and a testament to the TV show. Colton Dunn plays Garrett, the guy in a wheelchair as well. He's kind of like the other main character that we get in this episode, who isn't really a main character in this episode.
Yeah, there's also
He's doing like
he's
doing the narration.
There's a new start rival as well, isn't there?
Oh, Mateo, Nico Santos.
Does he come back?
Yeah. So like the main cast is quite big. So you've got the manager who's silly, bumbly. You've got Cheyenne and Bo, the young people who are having a baby. They're sidebar. They tried to get a spin-off with those two characters.
Good lord.
Christ.
It got
what in like 2002 when there was nothing else on? Oh no, right now in the modern world with like.
But guys, it didn't get picked up. But there is a pilot out there somewhere. I think they filmed a pilot.
Someone has thought far too long about what's even the appeal there. Like there's nothing, is there? It's so
the fact
weird.
you have a family sitcom like with characters that it's the whole point of a spin-off.
Click. There we go.
I know. There was a reason because these characters were popular, and like ultimately, like I said, I only watched this last year. I think I watched all of it in one big go, so I wasn't watching it when it aired. But like, it's a big ensemble cast mostly. We focus usually on the two main leads, but like it's a big ensemble cast, with week to week plot lines in a silly atmosphere, and they make lots of silly jokes, and it's kind of amusing, mostly amusing.
Yeah. And that's kind of what the critics said. It's 64% on Rotten Tomatoes from the first season, and a lot of people, interestingly, mirroring what I was saying because I'm a fucking genius. The first half of the season kind of a bit poor and like, well, yeah, all right, not poor, but just not landing where it needs to be, and then that improves as we go up, and then the subsequent seasons all have 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, granted with less critics looking at it.
You find that with quite a few though. Like it takes a season or so to like Parks and Rec again. We've mentioned it, but like Parks and Rec, the first season or two of Parks and Rec is pretty poor.
Yeah, even The Office.
Fine, but like it really, like season 3 is when Parks and Rec really kind of is it Mark when Mark leaves.
Yeah.
Once he goes, it's all gravy. But
well, it's the show finding its feet, isn't it? And like you've established these characters, and they introduce more in Superstore that we don't see in this episode, of secondary and tertiary characters. But much like Parks and Rec and The Office do, The US office is an interesting one because I would argue that the US office didn't become the US office really until they stopped reusing UK office scripts.
Yeah.
I think the Dundies in season 2 is the first episode that wasn't adapted from a script from the original from the UK version, and that's kind of where you get your first sort of cautious steps into like, let's actually build this TV
let's make this our own. Let's make this our own.
And that's kind of like an extended pilot in a certain way. But you are right, Joe. Parks and Rec is very similar. Like once we move past, we've got these characters and we kind of know what we're doing, and like actually, like let's make some changes. Like Andy and what's her face in Parks and Rec, Joe.
Leslie.
When they decide that actually,
not Leslie, the other one. Yeah, Anne.
Who? When they decide that, but that's an example. When they decide that like actually them as a couple doesn't work, it limits the series, and they get rid of that, and you're like, oh, actually, then these characters can breathe a bit. That's a great like development thing, and this series does that as well with introducing and chopping and changing characters, and The Office does it as well, and it's just like quite a natural way to, you know, what do people like? What is going to make a more interesting, funnier series? You know, like flanderizing characters as well, like taking a character's one trait and then, you know, taking that against three is a very fun way of like having fun with it.
And it's interesting we keep coming back to The Office because you mentioned there like that point where actually the writing staff and that core team of Office writers started to really kind of find their feet, and actually Justin Spitzer, who wrote this show and created it, was a writer on The Office for a long time, like from 2007 2012, and has got several sole writing credits. So like you can see, and I think it's interesting for American sitcom television how influential something like that is, and then the long tail of the kind of how everything's owed to the American Office, and how they needed to create their own identity in a way that kind of British sitcoms haven't done that in the same way. We don't have like, I don't think we can see so clearly that the distinction from The Office to what we have now, because I don't know why. Maybe there isn't the same.
The through line isn't as direct, I think.
No.
American
maybe it's the core writing
a lot more monolithic. Like obviously other things were on the air when The Office was on the air and Parks and Rec and things like that, but there's always like standout stuff. Whereas in this country, because things run for a lot less time usually as well, especially sitcoms, like it's less standout, less monolithic. It's less this one show we were all watching for 10 years, you know?
And they're all
has an effect.
Unless you're an Oxford graduate, you aren't going to be writing for television anytime soon.
Exactly. So fuck you.
That's the British system working as
Are your
designed.
ancestors descended from Normans? No? Well, get the fuck out, peasant.
Nope. Did you go to a Red Brick University? Well, then go get fucked, because you're not writing anywhere near us. Is how we work.
Exactly, but it's like you said, Tom. It's a different audience, and it's a different industry really. And the BBC obviously has a huge skew in the UK, and Netflix as well. Like has changed things massively. So it's nice to watch a network sitcom, which kind of still follows those like traditional lines where we're not quite on the 10 episodes being dumped in February and then 10 episodes being dumped the following February kind of like rotation with this. It's still kind of like following a lot of the classic network airing things. Like I think there's Halloween episodes and Christmas episodes and all of that. Not necessarily that's a good thing, but like they still got all the hallmarks of a network sitcom.
It really does. It's one of those. It's one of those shows that I don't think will be particularly like remembered. You know, it's not changing the world. It's not
pretty throwaway, isn't it? Really?
It is.
I mean, and I've only watched one episode, but it feels pretty throwaway.
And Joe's ready to cast it to the fire.
Second this podcast's over, I've already forgotten it.
But the comma in my sentence was, and that's okay. Like it's okay for something to be enjoyable and for it to make people laugh and to as we said at the beginning, switch off your brain and not think about the awful reality of Boris Johnson remaining as Prime Minister. Like all of these things, topical. All of these things are nice enough, and if your show's funny enough, and if you're warm to the characters in a way, like that's really what it's about, is sitting down and hanging out with your friends who are imaginary on TV, just like us on this imaginary podcast. Like it's all part of the media scape, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It is. I would say that this is worth a watch. Like maybe, like I said, not like tonight. Stop doing this podcast and go and watch it. But like, if you want something to put on, this is good. This is good TV by and large. And maybe the last season less so, because of the looming sort of shadow of COVID and the way they had to shoot it, and it's been a darkest timeline for a couple of years now. But like, especially the peak stuff, like the seasons 2 and 3 of this, really fun. Really enjoyable, and kind of like a good example of this kind of workplace sitcom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What more could you ask for?
This pilot wasn't great though. We think we should get out of the way. I think it was fine, but it's ultimately,
well, I didn't watch any more, and I know that's not the highest bar to reach, but I was like, not when I recommended this to you several years ago, saying no, you should watch this, and then never. 100% did.
Several years ago.
Sam definitely did recommend it.
I'm pretty sure we could go back in the archives.
I'm not arguing the point. What I'm arguing is that isn't the reason I watched this. I think I watched it because the Netflix algorithm said, "Why don't you watch this?" And I was like, "Well, I'm so desperate for something to watch and can't be bothered searching through Netflix for 40 hours."
Mm-hmm. I don't think you watched it because of Sam's recommendation, but I do remember Sam recommending it. And then not following up on that recommendation.
We call that the Breaking Bad phenomenon.
Yeah.
The most famous example, where Sam watched about half of the pilot episode of that, said, "This is pretty good." I watched 6 seasons of it, and then Sam never watched another second of it.
I'm okay with that. Let's go back to 3rd of February 2021, where you said, "So, Superstore, pretty funny." At 12:30 at night. So I'm going to call that, and I can't find my message where I said you should watch this, but I think that I feel vindicated by that. That's what I feel, vindicated.
You feel vindicated by a message from me telling you to watch it, proves somehow that you told me to watch it.
Exactly. Thank you very much for agreeing with my point, Dave. I appreciate that.
Sam.
So there we go. We've watched Superstore. We're moving on now from that discussion about how right I was. And next week we'll be back with something else. I'm very impressed we got 42 minutes out of this. I think this is a pretty middle-of-the-road show, and yet we're able to mine the depths of our amazing knowledge of television to once again deliver 45 minutes of top-quality podcasting. This is when you say something in response or laugh.
I don't have anything to say.
Okay. And we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Snorted.
I find talking about these TV shows very difficult.
Yeah, we find something to talk about at the end of the day. We can always change it.
I don't know how interesting that was, to be honest. I really do struggle.
It was fine.
I know, but I don't want to do fine. I don't know what... I just don't know what we're adding to the... anything. And we don't have the problem with movies because movies are longer and you can more talk about, whereas...
But that's fine. I think that maybe we just don't aim for the length. Do we want to go off live, by the way, if we're having a discussion about...
Oh, yeah.
Not that
no, you can watch it as well, listener. You can listen to us.
I think we just don't go for as long. I think we try and aim for too long, maybe on TV episodes.
I know, but then it's what's 20 minutes? Either if you half it or half an hour, and just think.
Yeah, but I think it's quite useful every couple of weeks having something a bit shorter. I think it's.
I don't know. Right. Well, bye, listener. Thank you. Bye.